American foreign policy. From World War II to Vietnam. By 1945, the forces of the United States and the Soviet Union had crushed the forces of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan.
After World War II, the Soviet Union supported the spread of communism, while the United States tried to stop it. This led to a conflict called the Cold War, in which the two superpowers vied for political and military advantage around the world.
With the end of World War II, U.S. President Harry Truman worried about the growing power of the Soviet Union. The Soviets were installing communist governments in Eastern Europe, creating a strong communist bloc. Truman believed that communism threatened democracy and human rights, and saw it as the responsibility of the United States to prevent its spread.
After World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States agreed to temporarily divide Korea along the 38th parallel. The northern half of the country was controlled by the Soviet Union. The southern half was a Republican administration. But in June 1950, Joseph Stalin, the General Secretary of the Soviet Union, became eager to expand communist domination. He ordered North Korea's leader Kim Il-sung to unite the country under communism. On July 15, 1950, tanks rolled across the 38th parallel. "100,000 well-trained and well-armed combat troops swarm into the south, meeting little resistance from the South Korean army. On September 2, 1950, the Security Council appointed American General Douglas MacArthur to take command of all United Nations forces in Korea. The United Nations and South Korean forces had been suffering heavy losses. The North Koreans seemed unbeatable. But MacArthur rejected any talk of a need to withdraw. It was his character and determination that carried his troops. By June of 1953, both North Korea and the United Nations forces stopped fighting at the 38th parallel, roughly the same point where the war had begun.
In 1953, former World War II General Dwight D. Eisenhower became President of the United States. Like Truman, he took a strong stand against communism. During Eisenhower's presidency, the United States would also take an interest in Vietnam. Like Korea, Vietnam was divided in two, with communists controlling the north. However, the communists tried to control the south as well.
NLF guerrilla fighters called the Viet Cong destroyed roads and bridges in the south and assassinated government officials. They carried out these attacks with the help of North Vietnam. He and his advisors worried that if Vietnam turned communist, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow in turn. This idea, called the domino theory, would shape American actions in Vietnam for years to come.
In 1961, John F. Kennedy became President of the United States.
U.S. involvement in Vietnam took a new turn. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had promised to back all wars of national liberation, like the one in Vietnam. This confirmed American fears that communists were bent on taking control of the world. Kennedy and his top aides saw South Vietnam as the only hope they had in preventing the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. Kennedy sent 400 military advisors to Vietnam to teach the South Vietnamese army how to fight.
Cuba permitted the Soviets to put armed ballistic missiles on Cuban soil, just 90 miles from the American coast. Kennedy knew that a standoff with the Soviet Union could have a disastrous ending.
Kennedy's negotiations with the Soviet Union would ultimately bring an end to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Premier Khrushchev has sent a message to President Kennedy today. The Soviet government has ordered the dismantling of weapons in Cuba.
After Kennedy was assassinated, Vice President Johnson became president.
Then, in August 1964, the fighting took a new turn. An American destroyer, the USS Maddox, was patrolling the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam when North Vietnamese torpedo boats began to fire at it. The attacks infuriated President Johnson. He ordered airstrikes against North Vietnam in retaliation. Johnson was forced to send more and more American troops. The United States was now fully involved in the Vietnam War.